Chapter 72. Chuck was hospitalized for nearly a month, during which time the CIA assigned a full-time professional to spy on the Furstenberg Barcelona family. The operative kept showing up in different disguises, first as a fire inspector, then as an encyclopedia salesman, next a county health nurse wanting to put an ear to Max's valve, until Queen Tilly, petting her chihuahua all the while, finally confronted the guy and said, "Why don't you just take the little camera and the notebook and go listening on the upstairs extension like Chucky did? You're gonna get a tension headache, always changing your looks like this." It was academic, of course. Short of direct armed intervention, there was nothing further the United States could do to preserve right-wing tyranny in Tilly and Max's homeland. And Max, suspecting that right-wing tyranny would only be replaced with left-wing tyranny, as was usually the case, had washed his royal hands of the whole affair. As for Princess Lee Cherie, who the CIA had learned was an unwitting candidate for reigning monarch once the revolution was complete, Lee Cherie, far from getting herself prepared to rule a nation, Lee Cherie was in the condition a camel pack was in once it's been dropped in a barnyard and chawed up and puked out by a goat. As news of her self-internment had circulated via the pages of such periodicals as National Enquirer, Parade, and Cosmopolitan, the princess had begun to attract more and more imitators. Women whose men were in prison or military service or Alaska working on the pipeline began bolting themselves in their rooms as public proclamation of lonely devotion. Several men did the same. Eventually, misguided romantics started taking to strip-down boudoirs, garrets, basements, woodsheds, doghouses, and fallout shelters when their lovers were not away at all, but could have been in their arms nightly if they hadn't been elected to sequester themselves as proof of their subjugation to the authority of love. A wife in Unionville, Indiana, a woman known to have spent $30 a week on Hallmark greeting cards, repaired to an unlighted cellar, creeping with black widow spiders to demonstrate the depth of her feeling for her husband and 3 hungry children. Some people who locked themselves away didn't even have sweethearts. By autumn, almost 100 princess prisoners were staring at wallpaper in improvised love attics across the land, and some sort of competition was underway, radio stations offering cash prizes for endurance records. Lee Cherie had an inkling of this activity, but her mind had been on pyramids and cosmic mystery, and she hadn't given it much thought. Well, the news finally traveled as far as solitary at McNeil Island, where evidently it did not sit well at all. In fact, Bernard, who had been behaving relatively straight in hopes of securing an early release, was so perturbed by the reports that he availed himself of the illegal but commonplace prison system underground post office and risked his record to sneak out a letter to Lee Cherie. The missive, in the handwriting of the bribed guard to whom it was dictated, was delivered by Purdy Birdfeeder, a middle-aged malefactor from Tacoma, freshly freed after doing 15 years for purse snatching. Birdfeeder, who'd grabbed hundreds of purses over a period of many years before he got careless and snatched a colostomy bag. He might have gotten away even then had he not stopped to count the change, helped tug the bleeding Chuck out of the blackberries, severely snagging his new government grant suit in the process, and then handed over the letter to Julietta. Birdfeeder could thank his lucky stars that the royal custom of executing messengers who bore ill tidings was no longer observed. Yuck. That was how the note began. Yuck. If you think the black hole is bad, you should try it with baby ferrets hanging by their teeth from the skin of your testicles. That's how I felt when I learned that our personal relationship had become public soap opera, a low-budget interview with Barbara Streisand, and a sport on the order of flagpole sitting and phone booth stuffing. Babe, it appears that you and I are no longer sucking the same orange. Romance is not a bandwagon to be jumped on by lost souls with nothing more interesting to ride. I thought you'd learned that by now, that romantic movement is a contradiction in terms, and that, if prompted, society is all too eager to turn the deepest, most authentic human experiences into yet another shallow fad. You prompted, I guess. You can take the girl out of the movement, but you can't take the movement out of the girl. Even in solitary, you couldn't curb your herding instincts. Leave it to a naive world saver like you to view our love as a sacred cause, when in actual fact, all it was some barking at the moon. Chapter 73. The tears of the princess, if placed end to end, would have circled Seattle like a moat. The tears of the princess, if dammed, would have provided refuge for the hunted whale and moorage for the ship of fools. Among the Berbers, it was held that since there is no memory in the grave, earth from a burial mound can help a person forget his or her sorrows, especially the heartbreak of unhappy love. But Bernard included no grave dirt with his letter, and if he had, the tears of the princess would have turned it to mud. After she had completely soaked the foam rubber mattress with her bitter weeping, she hurled the mattress out the window into the blackberries below. Too bad for Chuck, it hadn't been there when he fell. Then she smashed her chamber pot against the wall. Later, pacing frantically, she slashed her feet on its shards. Seizing the camel pack, she squeezed it in her small fist, toppling the pyramids and busting the dromedary's hump. Mummies ran from the pyramids in panic, dragging their wrappings behind them. Water spewed from the camel's cracked hump like a fountain of tears. For hours she would cry, softly, almost imperceptibly, rubbing her eyes raw with her knuckles. Then she'd leap to her feet and scream. Helpless, King Max and Queen Tilly and the CIA agent, disguised now as a Roto-Rooter man, kept vigil at her door, while inside the attic Julietta stood quietly, cupping Prince Charming in her hands, perhaps protecting him from the red-headed rage, perhaps invoking the magic of the frog. After 3 days of such carrying on, Lee Cherie grew calm. She was, after all, in close harmony with lunar rhythms, and that which wanes must wax. 3 days of darkness is as much as the moon will tolerate before it yelps, "Enough already," and begins to slowly reopen the antique refrigerator from whose icy innards will shine the transformative light of the world. Outside, the rains had come. The rains that, like a blizzard of guppies, would pelt the creaky old house until spring. There is no weeping that can compete with the northwest rains. So Princess Lee Cherie blew her nose. She sat her bare buttocks on the cot wires, careful not to snag anything. She thought for a while. She uncrumpled the camel pack. Then she smiled. She turned to Julietta. Her voice was determined and gay. "Bring me Aben Faisal," she said.